How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
To put this victory into perspective, back in February, Mamdani was polling at 1%, and he was up against big money's favorite candidate, former New York governor and guy at the diner who hasn't blinked in an hour, Andrew Cuomo. It turns out, so this is one of the biggest surprises, this election wasn't close. As of right now, Mamdani is ahead of Cuomo by over 7 points. Do you know? 7 points. Wow. Do you know how hard it is in New York City to be that far away from another person?
Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the sunny orangery extension to our Thursday home. Hallelujah. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi.
How are you, Naomi?
I'm good.
My weekend last week was thrown all out of whack with you and Kenny doing Sunday school. I think it's the first one I've missed since we started them, isn't it?
I think it probably is. I mean, you are a workhorse. It is true.
It was nice listening to the final results, sort of waking up and having a Sunday school to listen to. That I didn't
being a consumer,
know
yeah.
Absolutely. I didn't know what had gone in it. It was very nice, actually. So how has your week been?
Well, really good. I'm going to spend the weekend doing Pride-related activity because I just don't think it's ever been more important for us to show solidarity with the community. We've had just plenty to keep us busy at B4B Towers because we've got a few weeks left to go until parliamentary recess. So good opportunity to get talking to all of our stakeholders about all of our work and all while the sun is shining. So that's been lovely.
Now, seeing as this is so close to payday for most people, we must put out the collection tray once more. All of our content is free to everyone, including those who can't afford to pay for it. To do that, we need those who can afford it to help us keep this project sustainable. You can do so from as little as £5 a month at ko-fi.com/quietriotpod.
We will be holding our next live Ask Us Anything online event for those very Ko-Fi backers on Sunday, 20th of July. All Ko-Fi backers will receive an invite from Kenny soon, so if you want one, make sure you are signed up in good time. Now, Alex, what shall we get our teeth into today?
I think we have to discuss the concessions made by the government on welfare reform. I know it's been a dominant topic across quite a lot of our episodes recently, but A, it is important, and B, there's been a huge amount of movement. So I think we need to dig into it.
Good, I agree. And also, rather overshadowed by global events, the government has, as I mentioned, unveiled its trade strategy this week, but also its industrial strategy. So both of those big ticket things that really haven't got much airtime because of everything else that's been happening. So let's try and provide our listeners with a potted summary and reaction to both of those.
Finally, demonstrations against ICE raids in California and the deployment of troops were all we heard on the news about 4 days, about 3 weeks ago. Then the news cycle just moved on with the situation still unfolding, which I find just immensely peculiar. So I would like us to update listeners on what's going on.
Please do.
Quiet Riot.
On our main show this week with Ellie Chowns MP, we talked about the growing pressure on the PM from the increasing number of his own benchers prepared to rebel on the welfare bill. After we recorded, Lucy Powell took to the floor of the House to confirm that indeed the bill would hear its second reading next week, even though efforts to quash the rebels seemed to be failing. By Thursday evening, it was clear the government had lost the battle of playing tough and entered into negotiations with the key authors of the wrecking amendment that garnered more than 120 Labour signatures. Just in time for the front pages to go to print, white smoke appeared, and the government confirmed a rowback. chiefly that all existing personal independent payment claimants will be exempt from the cuts to eligibility, and all current recipients of the universal credit health element, plus any new applicants meeting the, quote, severe conditions criteria, also having their incomes protected in real terms. Reports are that this leaves Rachel Reeves with a hole of 1.5 billion at least to fill, perhaps more, with IFS figures saying there's now little incentive to get off those benefits if you risk not getting back on them if your employment doesn't work out for you. At the time of recording, we don't yet know how many of the near 130 potential rebels have been appeased, but we do know Meg Hillier, who penned the amendment, is won over, but MPs like Clive Lewis, Richard Bergen and Nadia Whittome have not.
Well, I think this is a good deal. It's a big change since last week. Massive changes to ensure that the most vulnerable people are protected in terms of their personal independence payments and the health element of universal credit, and crucially involving disabled people themselves in the design of future benefit changes.
All colleagues want to get this right, and so do I.
Alex, how inevitable was the climb down?
Well, it wasn't inevitable. I mean, plenty of governments have pressed on with pretty wrong-headed things, even though there's significant opposition to them. And the government has a big enough majority, I think, to have tried to throw a smaller bone. It only needs to sway a small proportion of those rebels over, and what it has offered is a more significant concession, I think.
Last time anything got as close to this, or defeating a government with such a large majority, was back in the days of Thatcher with her shops bill, very big majority, and got defeated at second reading. So it really would have been unprecedented for them to have pushed it and lost. And clearly the pressure was mounting, and there were so many briefings against Morgan McSweeney in the papers on the day of the negotiation. And I do think the pressure was such that the climb down was relatively inevitable by that stage. They would not have wanted to have, this early on to their term, risked anything close to a defeat.
Yeah, and I think even more so because of what happened with the winter fuel allowance and the conversation that seems to be ongoing about the two-child limit. It needed to happen before they marched loads of their more loyal MPs up another hill and then reversed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So the sequencing is the right way round, at least this time. But it's still a completely self-inflicted wound because, like we said, there is a full consultation going. There is a full green paper on what to do with this stuff.
Which presumably the consultation will have to pivot now, given the change to the detail of the bill.
I guess so.
So I don't know whether they need to reconsult or...
I don't know. I mean, it is effectively what the consultation was already doing. So they might extend the dates and kind of hoover this up into the more general consultation. Maybe. Who knows?
How damaging do you think it is for the government? I mean, it feels as though the rebels who have been won over, and again, we don't quite know how many of them have, may have been contained rather than converted.
Yeah, I stand by my assessment on Thursday's episode that what made this stand out was that it was cross factions of the Labour Party. It included people who don't rebel easily or
habitually.
And so I think that's what made it quite different. I think if tomorrow there's another objection and it's only the small group of people that are seen as on the left of the party, they will be ignored. What made this stand out was, well, first of all, how widely supported it was. But second, the reason it was supported widely is because the government were wrong. I mean, there are sometimes things that are up for discussion and sometimes things that you can say, well, I can see this school of thought and I can see that school of thought. But on this one, the government was wrong. It jumped the gun. And this is all completely, I think, on Liz Kendall.
Kendall seems to be getting off scot-free. The ire very much trained on Rachel Reeves and the PM and Morgan McSweeney rather than Liz, when you read the reports from journalists that have been hitting the phones to rebels about why they're annoyed with it. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, how much of this is, Starmer's been out of the country. He's had G7. He's had all sorts of geopolitical difficulties to be dealing with. And he'd left his ministers in charge of doing the ring around, trying to appease people. And he comes back and they failed. Do you think he is really going to be quite cross that he can't sort of leave home for a minute without everything descending into chaos?
The time to exercise control was when this bill was suggested. This was the most predictable outcome of this bit of legislation going forward. So
Yeah.
it's just really bad party management, I think, really bad political antenna, really, really bad. It's just a completely self-inflicted wound. There was not even any time pressure in this.
No.
So
I wanted to ask you about the money side of it. I guess the time pressure is the autumn budget. You've kind of got to know what you still got to find and then decide whether you're finding out from taxes or fiscal rule changes or whatever it is. And so, do you think that they have now trapped themselves in a fiscal and political bind of their own making? Or is there a really obvious route for Reeves to find the extra cash?
look, a 0.1 adjustment in the growth rate or a big investment or a factory opening can change the fiscal situation by more than $1.5 billion. In the context of a 1.3 trillion budget, $1.5 billion is a rounding error. So no, they haven't. It's just that I guess it goes on top of other things that they've had to U-turn on, and it begins to form a sort of pattern that says this government will say it will do X, but then when it's challenged internally, it will back down. It makes it about economic credibility rather than the actual figures, which are quite small. And again, I go back to what I said. If they hadn't announced this to start with, no one would now be talking about a hole in their finances. This wasn't part of the conversation. They were doing a big welfare reform thing that was progressing.
Yeah. Another underreported element of the bill was that not only did it hurt those who are currently in receipt of benefits, but that it would make it much more difficult if you or I in the future are to get sick or disabled.
Yeah.
And remember, we really are only one bad bout of depression or
A diagnosis or
bad
an
decision
accident.
about,
Yeah.
exactly, step out in front of a moving vehicle away from being in the same position as them. And I think what this change has amplified is that part of the bill, which had been largely ignored up to now. And, friends of mine who are very, very worried about losing their own benefits were saying, Naomi, if I were you, I'd take out some kind of insurance because your national insurance contribution, on which you have assumed would be there for you in the event of a change in your circumstance, now will not be in statute. So I wonder if actually more people will be attuned to the fact that, oh dear, okay, I was more or less ignoring this because I didn't think it affected me because I'm not on PIP, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that I might be one day and now I'm not going to be able to get it. So I don't know how it's going to play out with voters, even in its current state. And I wonder what your views are on whether or not Labour has created a policy that's fair or one that's just frozen the unfairness, if you know what I mean.
Look, the situation as it stands makes it easier for people to argue for those who will need benefits in the future. If it had been taken away from everyone, that wouldn't make life any easier for new claimants. It would actually make it harder because you couldn't point to this disparity that people campaigning for a more equal access can point to.
So do you think the left of the party needs to get better at learning how to bank a win, or are they right to be digging in on point of principle?
Look, it's always a balance. If the government knows that it can never do anything that will please Nadia Whittome or Clive Lewis, then it stops paying attention to those voices altogether. So there is a balance to be found between recognizing that the government has made a significant concession here and pressing on for more concessions down the line. if you cast yourself purely in the role of a heckler, then that's how you will be seen, as a heckler. The situation with the disparity, I think, is complicated, and I'll share with you a personal experience that kind of maps onto it. When EU citizens lost their citizenship rights and had to effectively reapply for the right to be in this country, as I did, a lot of people who had to use the system as it was for people outside the EU, so maybe from the Commonwealth or wherever, were quite unsympathetic and said, well, this just puts you in the same boat as we've been for all this time. But it really doesn't work like that, because if you have planned your life around a set of rules, having them taken away is not the same as that set of rules not existing in the first place.
Yeah.
It just
Very
isn't.
much.
The people who are on PIP would have struggled a huge amount more. It would have been more of a struggle to suddenly lose that than to, at some point in the future, apply and find it harder to get. Our lives adjust around the set of rules that we have to deal with, especially our finances.
Listeners, we will keep a very keen eye on that second reading, names that are going on various other amendments, and bring you more as and when we have it.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
Writing in the FT ahead of unveiling a government's new industrial strategy, Keir Starmer suggested that for decades we have had a state that paradoxically both stands back and interferes too much, that is both overbearing and feeble. The strategy published on Monday centres around the idea that the government will target most of its efforts to accelerate growth in the fastest growing third of the economy. To that end, it has identified 8 sectors, the IS8, it's calling them, with high potential for growth. And they are advanced manufacturing, life sciences, clean energy, defence, professional services like accounting and legal, financial services like banking and insurance, digital and technology businesses with a focus on AI and quantum computing, and I am very pleased and surprised to say, the creative industries, which is one of the most productive bits of our economy and is always, always ignored.
Can we apply for a government grant, Alex?
I doubt it. We'd have to be a lot less critical, I think. Then on Wednesday, the sister trade strategy was published ahead of the British Chambers of Commerce conference in London on Thursday.
Trade isn't just about goods. We're a services superpower. So we'll back out exporting services as well. Show more flexibility in that approach. And what we want to do is push not just for traditional trade agreements, but also for smaller deals that we can make quicker at pace.
Its aim, and I quote, is boosting exports and protecting UK firms at a time of growing uncertainty. A not so subtle reference to Trump's tariffs, I think. Its stated approach is to remove obstacles for UK businesses selling abroad, while also bolstering the country's trade defences to avoid the risk of cheap imports. Naomi, you focused quite a lot on the new trade strategy. You were even there at the launch. What is in there, I think, that seems genuinely fresh?
Well, the fact that we have one is the most significant thing of all. Because for at least a decade, we have had governments whose approach to trade was to put up barriers. And we now have one that is very insistent on tearing them down and has done far more to sign very real, tangible deals than any of the ones that have come before it since the time of political podcasting really kicked off. So that is great. Within it, you've got a heavy emphasis on the EU. And Starmer said it himself in the speech he made to the British Chambers of Commerce, but it is peppered throughout the document that there is a recognition that Europe is our most important, must be prioritised trading partner. Starmer talked at the conference about the need to have these annual summits with the EU and that they are designed to help us go further and faster and deeper and in a more integrated way with Europe than was even agreed at the summit on the 19th of May this year. So that is all very new and good. There is also, for the first time, an articulation of government strategy to acknowledge that while we are a services-led economy, services and goods are now very linked. You know this, listeners. You know that when you buy a product, a good, an item, a tangible thing, it will ordinarily come with some kind of service agreement attached to it, whether that's a warranty, whether it's because you bought it on finance. We don't have the separation of church and state with goods and services at all. They are very linked to one another. And I thought it was incredibly refreshing to see a government articulate that they get that point, that we are a service-led economy and we need to prioritise that, not just goods, and that the two are very, very linked.
I mean, even the
And then-
sending of the thing is an act.
Exactly.
Is a
Even the
service.
sending of the thing requires logistics. And then they also talked very specifically about PEM, which is the Pan-European Mediterranean group, which is around the rules of origin. So this is all of the rules that pertain to whether or not a product has got sufficient ingredients from one country or a range of countries in order to be able to flip-flop across borders seamlessly. And that's really interesting because it was kind of lesser talked about by this government. And I'm really, really pleased to see it in there. It is not joining a customs union, but it is going to be a huge help to British firms that seek to trade with Europe. And what they've done is they've said that we need to open a consultation on that. And I don't think they would be consulting on it if they didn't want respondents to that consultation, chiefly SMEs that export all over the world, but in particular with Europe, to say, yes, we would really like that and it would help us immensely. So those are the really good big things in it. There is some stuff in there around the USA and talking about mutual recognition. And long-term listeners will have heard me mention those dull but important words many times. What we want with Europe is mutual recognition of conformity assessment so that we can verify the quality of one another's goods in our domestic countries and not have to get extra kite marks stamped on each of them to prove that this product is okay to be sold in both the single market and the UK. We did see some of it peppered throughout the tariff deal that was negotiated with the US. And in the trade strategy document, there is talk of that, but it kind of quickly goes into talking about the mutual recognition of professional qualifications. And there's a big section there talking about engineers in particular, that if you've got an engineering qualification from the UK or the US, each other's country should recognise that, and you shouldn't have to requalify in order to work there or here, depending on where you've come from. And so I think that's either a way to say, actually, US, it's the people that we want to have the mutual recognition with rather than the products, or it just might be that the way the document was typeset, the section on engineers came immediately after talking about mutual recognition of product. Not sure. But broadly, I think it's a bloody good that we've got the strategy. B, I think it reflects everything we heard coming out of the EU-UK summit, but in a very, very clear and concrete way that this is an ambition. We get it. We know how vital it is. While we will pursue full fat deals like the one we have with India, with other countries, the most important one is the EU. And that because the EU is the most important one, actually what we're going to be looking at is not full fat trade deals, but something a bit more flexible with other countries around the world. So if a country has a particular expertise or ability to produce something that we don't do here so well, but that's it. And what would be the point of doing a full fat trade deal with them when really we only need to do a deal on that one particular item or service? Then that is the patchwork quilt approach we're going to take. So it felt very grown up, very rooted in reality and business need. And I found very little in it with which to find fault.
A friend of mine in Brussels has described it in a way that I found very, very useful. And what they said to me is that it looks like Labour has decided to go for a beehive approach. And what they mean by that is a series of small hexagonal things that all fit with the ones around them.
Yeah, that's a nice, elegant way of describing it.
So if you find that you then go to do a deal or a specific agreement with another country on X, you can see that it doesn't fit with those more important partners whose hexagons are already around it, so you junk it. But the point, I think, politically, is that each of the hexagons individually cannot be pointed at and called an undoing of Brexit.
Indeedy.
But the total of them is a beginning to restoring normalised relationships with the EU.
And I think Douglas Alexander would love to be considered a queen bee.
I mean, it is a smart thing to do, but it is obviously more complicated. You know what I mean. There are also advantages to a government that maybe had the gumption to say, this is nonsense, the most important thing we need to do is actually enter some sort of custom union with Europe. And we would both love that. It is politically more risky, but in terms of a trade strategy, it is simpler and cleaner and clearer and less resource intensive.
Sweet honey, baby. You're so Greek. You're so Greek that you went for the honey analogy.
Can I ask you just one thing?
Sure.
I mean, a unilateral trade strategy is by definition incomplete because it's a process of give and take with other countries. So can a government, as this one is promising, remove obstacles for exports while raising them for imports?
Well, when we look at the word strategy, it's just a highfalutin way of saying a plan. That's all it is. A strategy is just a plan. It's just a longer term plan than your to-do list for today. And it is a guiding principle. It's a framework. So within it, there is, I think, plenty of scope to do the very thing you're talking about, that when it works for us, we can aim to do X. In reality, we might end up with, X minus 1, but it won't be nothing at all. And I think that is exactly the right way to be doing it. So you're right. You may find that one of your trade partners gets wind of you trying to do something with somebody else and says, no, thank you. We really don't like that. That would undermine the terms of the deal you signed with us. But I think the government, having been so clear in saying the EU one is the priority and all else fits around it, is the most pragmatic and sensible way for them to be approaching this. And if you like it, it's a clothes rail on which to hang things, not the actual full complete wardrobe.
That makes sense. So it's a guiding principle for the opening bid in many ways, but you accept that you might have to make concessions and X. Okay.
Now, you mentioned that this was far from the only big policy announcement this week. We had the publication, of course, of the industrial strategy just days before. Alex, what exactly does, quote, a state that is both overbearing and feeble mean? And are the policies unveiled this week likely to wash away the blockages in industry in the UK?
I found that piece that Starmer wrote in the FT very interesting because it's full of those kinds of seeming contradictions. But I think he's got a point, you know. I reading it, something rang very true. The state relies on process. So what happens is that you have this complex set of rules and you have a network of officials whose job is to apply those rules, right? And so that means that the state can interfere quite a lot with businesses, with building, with your life, with when you put your bins out. In all those small ways, the state can intervene significantly. But without an overall plan, it means that the state is doing all these interventions just because the rules are there and there's someone whose job is to enforce them. And so actually it does make sense that the product of not having a trade strategy for almost 2 decades, the product of not having an industrial strategy for almost 15 years, is that the state keeps intervening in ways that are annoying but not necessarily meaningful. The first thing to say is that concentrating your firepower on the sectors that you think are most likely to grow and in which you have a competitive advantage is smart.
Yeah.
Lowest hanging fruit. It's as simple as that. But the criticism has been that tries to fine tune things in narrow ways, but it doesn't talk about the big things. For instance, much of this industry that we talk about is so reliant on higher education
Oh, yeah.
or immigration or tax reform. It has little to say about the big ticket items, which are really difficult to tackle. And instead, it goes into specific sectors and seeks to generate positivity with the companies and the lobbyists and the MPs who have those factories in their constituencies. Do you know what I mean? So they can point to something and say, look, there's this big thing coming down the line, you're getting a big subsidy, or we're going to build this new factory or this new data processing center here. But the overarching stuff has gone in the too difficult to tackle box, which is, immigration, the generation of energy, tax reform, higher education. You can't create an immigration system that, for instance, undermines the business model of universities by reducing the flow of foreign students, and then expect that not to have an impact on the skills that are available for your industrial base. It will. So, I mean, going back to what you were saying about the trade strategy, it is amazing that we have one. It is amazing that we have a government with a horizon that is longer than the next 6 months or the next Telegraph headline, and at least tries to put together some sort of cogent plan against which
Indeed.
more temporary policies can be assessed. You can now take a bit of legislation or a bit of, funding or a bit of subsidy. You can hold it against these two papers and say, does it help with these things? Because they're our core aims.
Exactly. It's the lens through which you will look at the other things that come in front of you as a government. It becomes the filter by which you make a go, no-go decision, rather than being buffeted by events or opportunities or challenges that come your way. You now have a framework within which you can assess the cost and benefit and ability of that new policy to help you reach your destination or have it risk taking you further away from it. So all of that, very, very welcome. I mentioned in the trade strategy that there was this sort of heavy focus on the fact that we are a service-led economy. How about the industrial strategy? Most of those key sectors you talked about clearly have both.
Actually, some of those sectors have only services. Like half of the sectors that were announced are just about services. I think that is a long needed recognition that that is our strength. We are a services exporter and we do it really well. And it is where actually all the advantages of a relatively stable legal system, of English being the universal language, all of those things come together.
Actually, there's another one, Alex,
Yeah,
which is very fortuitous rather than anything of our own making. GMT.
yeah.
Our markets can open before Asia's have closed and stay open while America's open. And that really is quite a significantly lucky thing that helps financial services, certainly.
Well, I mean, arguably it's not lucky. It's an imperial hangover, and created precisely so that we would be at the center
But you know what I mean,
all
like where the sun and the moon are.
But yeah. So I think that's really important. This shift in focus, it's quite forward-looking, because I think for the first time the focus is not entirely some sort of rose-hued past when we used to make things, which is quite a big burden on quite a lot of right-wing economic thinking, this notion that we need to go back to making things. Sure, there are points about self-sufficiency, especially with key things. We saw that play out in the pandemic. There are valuable industries. There are industries in which we have a genuine competitive advantage. There are industries in which we could be making more things, but our strength is in services, and it is services that have been largely ignored by governments for the last, certainly since Brexit. I mean, the notion that the Conservative government gave away a trade agreement that just doesn't contain anything on services is just bizarre.
How has everything been greeted by commentators that you've spotted?
Polite applause, I guess, which is an improvement to what's been normally happening. So basically, even those who don't particularly like this government, which is most people right now, have had to grudgingly accept that having these things in place is a huge step up and a step forward from not having these things in place and just going out and announcing whatever week after week with no overall aim or strategy or objective. And there is some genuinely forward-looking stuff in there. There are things about the circular economy, about an obligation on manufacturers to, for instance, open up their repair networks from being a very closed shop, of making parts available for longer for the models that they sell in the UK, so that people can repair
Indeed.
and reuse and recycle things for longer. Subsidies for repair shops and repair workshops. All of that stuff is genuinely forward-looking and innovative and is not happening in many other places. But it's not sexy, so you're not going to see it reported in many places. Another thing that having this kind of long-term plan, I think, does is expose just the paucity of economic thinking on the right. There was quite an extraordinary piece in CapEx, which, as you will know,
Yeah.
is the sort of publication attached to all those Tufton Street think tanks. And it's very much Taxpayers Alliance, very much right wing. So there was a piece by Matthew Elliott saying that a truly modern industrial strategy doesn't pick winners. Instead, it creates the conditions for businesses to thrive in. That means affordable energy, reliable infrastructure, and a government that sees business not as something to be taxed. Now, if you dig into that even minimally below the surface, it's like it doesn't pick winners. What do you mean? Can it support every sector? Can it create the conditions for businesses to thrive in every single sector? Obviously not.
No, and if you even done 101 economics, you will have done the law of comparative advantage.
Obviously. It's almost like a collection of phrases that trigger some kind of Thatcherite serotonin in them that they just keep recombining. Like, it means affordable energy. Oh, so you want government to intervene in the energy sector? in a really, really big way, do you? Just not in any other sectors. So what does that mean for the energy companies? And when you say the government just needs to provide reliable infrastructure and see businesses not as something to be taxed, like who's going to pay for the infrastructure if we don't tax businesses that use that infrastructure?
How do you pay for that infrastructure?
I mean, it's like a almost primary school essay on economics. Just silliness. And I think that is a problem because it actually makes economic thinking as a whole less sharp. When the critique is so puerile and pathetic, there is nothing there to sharpen up what you're trying to do, point out the flaws in it, improve it in some way. When the whole of the Conservative Party basically doesn't have any policies, it just stumbles on week after week from one culture war issue to another, well, that doesn't actually help the government and it doesn't help the country. So
Broadly, the business community has welcomed the trade strategy full throttled to very high applause. So they are all very pleased with the contents, the direction of travel, the overarching message contained within it. And I'm sure we'll be holding government's feet to the fire to go further and faster on the reset with
of
the
course,
EU.
I mean, that's how this works, right? This is a good step and this is the next step we want you to take. That's how adult politics works.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Barely a fortnight ago, the news was flooded with reports of riots in LA, spreading to other cities across the USA as protesters against deportations were met with Trump-sanctioned force, including the National Guard. Indeed, Alex, you and I spoke in detail about it on this very show. But the media soon got distracted by other world events, promptly dropped the story, and leaving us all wondering, what has happened? Did the protesters give up? Did law enforcement back down? Or is everything still happening with riots raging, just not with the glare of the media? So, Alex, wagwan, tell us.
I mean, I don't know if I'm alone in finding it extraordinary how these things just disappear out of the news. Am I alone in thinking, what's going on with that?
No, because we recorded a whole show on it and I did loads of research on what the actual National Guard is for and when it's been deployed. And, we felt like this was this huge moment. And then all of a sudden, the news stopped reporting it.
So the answer is there are no riots raging in California because there really weren't in the first place. They just kept showing the same footage of one Uber burning over and over again and a bin being set on fire, but that's not really raging riots. So there are still protests, but they are as peaceful as most of the ones were back then. The National Guard is still deployed fully, including the sort of 700 Marines. The legal case is ongoing. One decision came that the deployment of the National Guard over the head of Gavin Newsom, who's the governor of California, was unlawful. It was then very quickly overturned by a circuit court. But what has gone through is an order for the White House to provide adequate information to the state about why they're deploying the National Guard, what the basis for it is, what the remit for it is. Because remember, one of the problematic things was that they couldn't say what the Guard was there for, what the Guard was there to do.
Exactly, yeah.
And there has been some overstepping that I think but for the situation in the Middle East, would be getting a lot more attention. So, for instance, hundreds of those National Guard people were apparently deployed in a DEA raid somewhere in the countryside on some big marijuana growing farm, which is absolutely not within the remit of the federal government basically deploying the National Guard. The one thing they're not meant to do is do law enforcement that local law enforcement is there to do, which is why they kept saying, oh, they're there just to protect law enforcement. But, sending them out to some cannabis farm 20 miles out of LA to help with a raid is a big overstep of that. So there is a lot of churn still going on, and the legal case is proceeding through the courts, but actually arguments won't be heard until about September. So the situation could persist in its current sort of frozen stasis until September. In the meantime, the people who fight forest fires, and actually the people who mind the borders for drug smuggling and things like that, who are usually helped by the National Guard at the request of the state governor, they've been left really depleted.
Are
Like the
down.
forest service is operating on 40% of capacity. The border patrols they're a third down. So it's a recipe for disaster. And
In a hot summer. I mean, come on.
one thing that did happen that is tangentially related to all this stuff is that the Supreme Court on Friday handed down a judgment that was a big victory for Trump. Actually, executive power in America in general, because it curbed the ability of lower courts to block executive orders on a national basis and in an injunction way, so preemptively.
I want to thank Justice Barrett, who wrote the opinion brilliantly, as well as Chief Justice Roberts, and Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas. Great people. Thanks for this decision, and thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore, ending sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping federal taxpayers from paying for transgender surgeries, and numerous other priorities of the American people.
Now, the reason I say it is tangentially related to what's going on in California is because even though what's going on in California does not fall under this sort of category of trying to injunct a president not to do something on a national basis, but it is tangentially related because plainly the White House intends to use it as a very broadly interpreted nod by the Supreme Court that actually what the executive says goes, that executive orders are all powerful and that actually Trump is the emperor and what he says goes.
Yeah.
My feeling is that this is a bit of a mixed blessing, though. When you begin to reduce the legal options for states to defend the Constitution as they might see it, then what begins to open up is slightly more extreme and more rebellious options. So, for instance, Trump's ability to take away funding from sanctuary cities. Now, if states feel that they no longer have a legal way of responding to that, a sort of regularized way of responding to that, then they might start resorting to more extreme measures, for example, withholding tax and saying, look, if you're going to victimize us in terms of the federal funds you give us, why should we keep paying into the coffers? And my feeling is that actually what this might force is a bigger constitutional crisis than the Trump administration would want. But we'll see how it pans out. So all that is going on, and a very nice little interesting offshoot is that Gavin Newsom is suing Fox News for just under $800 million because apparently they edited a clip to misrepresent that he had said he'd never spoken with Trump when he had said he hadn't spoken with Trump since the deployment of troops, which the White House has confirmed. It was the day before he federalized the National Guard and Fox News edited it to make it look like he had lied and said, no one had contacted him from the White House. And I find that quite interesting because that's really a very Trumpian playbook thing to do.
Oh, yeah. If you can't beat them, join them.
So I find that quite interesting. It's like, here's a little dose of your own medicine. How do you like it?
I think we should probably do a special on the Dems because obviously we've also got Mamdani in New York rising rapidly through the ranks there for potentially taking the New York mayoralty. Let's see what happens to Newsom with this lawsuit. There's a party having sort of been in retreat since last November. Perhaps they have used that time more wisely and are recalibrating. So, yeah, maybe we should give them a little look.
Or maybe they're doing so individually because they're preparing for who will be the nominee next time. So maybe we are seeing the people who are interested in the nomination for the next presidential election be slightly more hands-on than the people who are not interested. And who are the three most active voices in the Democratic Party at the moment? I would argue Gavin Newsom, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and Pete Buttigieg. And I would be surprised if those three names weren't mentioned when it comes time to the primaries.
Quiet riot.
And with that, my darling, we must draw proceedings to a close. I feel that order has been restored. Listeners, thank you as ever for tuning in. We relish the gorgeous feedback you've been sending us lately, and it really does make everything feel worthwhile.
It does. Knowing that we're not alone in this mad world is a deep comfort, and we're very proud of the whole Quiet Riot community. And if you want to get more involved in that community with invites to our Discord channel, our regular editorial meetings and Ask Us Anything sessions, then sign up at ko-fi.com/quietriotpod. And remember, our next Ask Us Anything will be on Sunday, 20th of July.
We shall return on Thursday with Arthur Snell for the main show. So in the meantime, make the most of the heat wave, stay hydrated and wear some sunscreen.
Remember that we love you lots. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Finally, a very, very happy Pride to all who celebrated, but especially to the LGBTQ plus Hungarian community, because they have responded to Viktor Orban's ban of Pride events magnificently. To give you an idea, last year 35,000 people turned up for Budapest Pride. This year, because of Orban's ban, up to 200,000 people turned up and had a big old party. I can only say, good on you.
So you've got a business, but what about a brand? The difference? More of you. Wix gives you the freedom to create your website, own your brand, and do it on your own, exactly how you envisioned it. Experience limitless customization. Boost your creativity and efficiency with AI tools for every part of your business journey. Scale up with built-in SEO, e-com, and scheduling features. Put more of you in your business. Go to Wix.com and do it all yourself.